I haven't recorded there's like half a year later for me, so we're just gonna get right back into this and hope that I don't have to cut out too much again. Episode 28. Lucille actually organizes an activity for today. It's to better prepare the kids for psychic attacks, such as the ones inflicted by the Elephant Man, via astral projection. So if the kids aren't in their bodies, they can't be physically attacked. And to try and imitate a psychic attack, nightmare powder will be thrown at the bonfire. But Lucille apparently doesn't need to practice because she has her own methods of dealing with it. Okay. Record a segment. This is new. Cindy just wants to talk and has been taking care to not overshare over the announcements anymore. So he's talking to the recorder now. Did yesterday not happen? That would definitely be considered oversharing. Oversharing to the point where it's weird that no one came to his office to say anything. I mean, he wasn't even telling them what activities were going on or what they were gonna eat. That feels weird. Did we miss something? His bed is in Jedediah's room, and it has a specialized mattress for his back pain. But he's avoiding Jedediah, so he's crying himself to sleep at night in a cot in the nurse's office instead. So he's in more pain than usual. He also had a dream with a man in a red paisley suit. The man looks kinda like Jedediah sometimes. In the dream, they're sitting in Sydney's old college dorm. He tells Sydney to inform him on why he is troubled. Everything I said last time about how Sydney imitates people, and this guy specifically, still stands. It's a really good performance. Sydney tells him why he's scared that he won't find the journals, and without them, he'll be nothing again.
The man gave a sharp smile, the gold dust glittering in his eyes. Silly creature, you have friends. I tried to object, but he cut me off. Talented friends who invite you to dinner. Help from all walks of life. All you have to do is ask. I said, all I do is ask. What's wrong with that? All I do is listen. I should help myself, right? There's no such thing as should, darling, he said, lifting the blade to his cheek. There is only need, want, and will.
Man, it kind of feels like he's functioning as a therapist of sorts for Sydney. Not the best one, but stating that he's just there to listen, and in a previous section he was trying to get Sydney to talk about how his mother hurt him. So he's kind of fits the category of like a therapist figure, sorta. Hey, I was gonna talk about a live stream clip where it said that the dream guy bastardized DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy, I think. But I was having a really hard time wording it and making it make sense, but I still wanted to put this here to acknowledge that I tried. I'm aware that it is specifically correlated to something in real life, but I can't. I know that this is a thing, but I don't know how to word it. So Sydney takes what he says and asks the man for help. The man cuts a slash into his cheek rather than his hand, because he savors the sensation of touch, more than his face. Apparently blood can help Sydney touch what information comes to him, like the bonfire can help him see. The man can pick up on the environment where the journals are.
Wet and cold, dark, gritty. Pebbles strewn among trails of soft elfin green, dangling from the underbelly of its own most valuable secret. Plants growing out from under a hospital bed. Oh, and there's a short, stiff feather on the ground. Am I making sense, darling? Do you hear me?
I'm assuming it's a cardinal feather, and the hospital bed also seems connected to Sydney being ill in some sort of way. I don't think those are connected with the location itself. Maybe it's connected with the journals and what they're about. But we do get some descriptors of what seems to be an actual environment. Sydney asks for the man's name.
What's your name? His head snapped forward and his eyes lit up. His smile tore his face in half. He lifted a happy hand. Up and Adam!
Adam, yay! And I like his name. I think it's fun. I think it's fun. I think we're having fun here. Then Sydney woke up with blood on his cheek. And do you remember the time when the sanatorium was cleaned for Sydney and a red candle and the smell of mischief was left behind? Pretty sure that was Adam. So he's affecting the real world and seems to be helping Sydney specifically. Lunchtime! Yay! The only kids that were able to astral project were some of the kids from Cabin Dunbeetle. And the cabin even asked for more nightmare powder. Chekhov's nightmare powder. He also tells everyone that he's not going to be in tomorrow because he has some errands to run. Recorder. Sydney's going to find the journals, and according to what Adam said, the journal should be in the penguin tunnels, apparently. I really like this section. Like, I remember the first time I listened to it, I wasn't technically skipping class, but I was avoiding going back to class by slowly walking around outside. So it looked like I had somewhere to be. Listening to this section and just laughing and murmuring to myself. Memory that stuck in my head very strongly for some reason. So he's in the tunnels and he seems to be having a great fucking time out down there.
This down here is true night. True cold. True quiet. True stillness. Except for me. I mean, he's all like, oh, I wouldn't want to hurt you, but then he does. But it's emotional pain, I guess.
The cave seems to be making him really open about his emotions.
Oh my god. What if Elijah's down there already, just waiting for me, and he'll be like, oh, you've passed the test, my sweet darling.
Elijah does have like a Russian accent, but he hides it with with a perfect American accent. We currently at this point in the podcast, I'm pretty fucking sure we have not heard him slip up with it yet. So I don't know how Sydney knows about this yet. I mean, like, when you turned off his recorder at some point, so maybe. I mean, he said he's from Russia, but I don't know. It's not a criticism, very funny segment. And the fact that he makes fun of him in general is kind of funny. And shows that, at least currently, he's not 100% taking him seriously as a threat or anything. He finds an opening that's filled with sickly looking greenery. Up in the vines, Sydney can see the journal and gets the vines to lower the books down. Hidden in some kind of semi-sentient plant is an out-of-nowhere place for Jedediah to know about. Unless you remember the plant that Lucio was weirdly protective over. And the kids couldn't take it out because the plant was too deep down into the ground. This plant and that one, I think, are connected. But still, why did Lucio care so much? It makes a little more sense considering it was part of an entire creature, I guess. But still not an actual explanation. Maybe we'll get explained later. And then, out of nowhere...
What? What the fuck is happening to my brain? Where the fuck am I? I need to get out.
Episode 29. Jedediah's on the mic. He's of course worried even though Sydney filed out a day's leave. Recorder segment. We hear Sydney and Elijah talking. He thanks him profusely for the journals, but he can't read them until the ceremony. They eat together, and Elijah is eating raw meat from the cattle he shepherds.
Shepherding to you means just hunting?
Perhaps they do things differently where I come from.
Hey, I need you to remember this. Like, it's obviously very clear insight into his mindset.
Do you mind if I remove the mask?
I guess not.
All your choice, my love.
Shut up. Then he holds up his end of the deal now that he was given the journal. He's gonna tell Sydney the truth. This is also hard to summarize. There was an architect. He knew of science and machines. When he finishes a project, he just throws it away.
A beauty which burned brightly behind his eyes, behind his stupid little square glasses. The love was his saving grace.
Fucking love this line. It's just such a genuinely petty insult. He just fucking hates his ass. I like that alongside all of Elijah's genuine hatred. He's just fucking catty.
But though he knew this love, though he held it in his oversized head, he never understood it. He did not understand how to feed it, how to witness it as it was meant to be witnessed. And so the object of his love began to falter.
Like the fly. Just the fucking Fruity the Foo fly. It's like the fly.
And when, one day, his love died tenderly on the clean sheets it was gifted, our stupid architect divided by zero. The architect ended death. Stupid man. He tore the universe apart for the sake of his muse, now the only living creature to have ever kissed heaven's gate and still extracted its lips from the cold metal. He did not care. His love project was complete. But the universe loved you.
I'm not gonna spell it out yet because I want to keep up with Cindy's perspective, but I trust you get it. I enjoy how the information in the show is organized, with how much knowledge is revealed even if Cindy hasn't fully connected the dots. The audience most likely has. It gives other coming up story points / mysteries room to breathe, so the audience isn't keeping track of too many things at once, which I appreciate, because it always annoyed me when a story is juggling too many mysteries at once. And now that we know that aspect, it can let other things coming up make more sense and be more compelling on its own.
Oh, Muse. As life itself was blessed by your rebirth, so will I be blessed by my love for you.
What Elijah's love is something I find really fascinating. Like, there was always a religious aspect to it, but it could also be seen as a genuine adoration. You know, like, the religious aspect followed behind the genuine feelings. But this line to me is what made it feel swapped.
Oh, Muse. As life itself was blessed by your rebirth, so will I be blessed by my love for you.
He loves what Cindy represents through his religious viewpoint, and how it will bless him. But I think he might just think of this as real love. Selfless, unconditional love. And that's what I think is really interesting. He thinks he knows what Cindy wants, and is right for a decent amount of it. Cindy does want to be appreciated, so that's what he wants to do for him. This is true love to him. And we finally get the Russian accent. Yippee.
Are you listening to me? Wake up. Wake up! The time for sleep is still to come!
Lunch. Jedediah tried to get Lucille to show him the day's leave papers Cindy filled out, and no kids are coming into the nurse's office, presumably because the kids do not like Jedediah. Recorder. Elijah wishes to show the masses Cindy's beauty, and to immortalize it. And the use of shepherd is really ominous considering what he does to the animals that he does shepherd. Cindy is flattered but clarifies that he is just a guy, just some fucking guy. Elijah views this as Cindy talking down to himself.
Your own divinity, but I see you for what you are. A living, breathing masterpiece. A blessing unto existence itself. Everything anyone could ever love.
Okay.
I will...
Cindy does his okay response, and this shows that Elijah's starting to actually overwhelm him. He feels cornered, and that nothing he can say can get him out of this, so he's just going along with it and answering simply.
The cattle, they listen to me. When they look into my eyes, they feel my passion. I will herd them, my followers, your witnesses, to the pyre of borrowed sentiment. I will light the tower of flame. I will bring you apotheosis through sleep. I will make you eternal, our perfect muse relaxed forever upon the pyre. You will be, as you were meant to be, forever beautiful, forever loved.
He did want to be loved, so he's gonna set Sydney on fire and make him eternal. It's fun how he uses the word passion, while the word most commonly used by other people is fervor when describing his influence on other people. I know definition-wise it makes sense, but fervor makes it sound much more obtrusive. Passion just feels more positive overall. He also calls the kid cattle. Again, he tends to kill the cattle he shepherds, so... Whoa. Sydney is freaked out, obviously, and he says he needs to leave.
I have to go. I need to leave, okay? I'm leaving.
Do as you wish, my muse. Wherever you go, I will find you.
Bye.
We hear a clock. I think he realized that Elijah isn't some escape from his existing problems. It's not that he's forgiving Jedediah, but maybe he just doesn't want to completely ignore him anymore. Episode 30. God, so many episodes are so good. We get a Jedediah mediation episode! Yay! There's a mediation episode between Joshua and Yvonne. They seem to be scattered when trying to describe what their argument is. He's about to leave, and in a panic, Yvonne and Joshua try to come up with something to say, and Joshua blurts out,
"Wait! Hey, Jedediah, remember when Sydney and I were roommates in college?"
All too well.
This would have been the first time you heard about them knowing each other in college if I did not spoil it earlier. But I really like how it's presented, just as something sudden. Something happened in college to Jedediah that sullied the whole thing. To try and distract him, Yvonne recounts a college memory. At one point, Yvonne got Jedediah to go to a college party. At the party, the DJ and people were trying to get Jedediah to recommend a song because he was a reclusive kid with a cross necklace, and they were curious about what he'd pick. They admit that they just want to talk with Jedediah, and the mediation sessions are just their only opportunity to. He apparently hasn't been so openly stressed out since the last year of college, and they want to help him.
I know you've never been much for confiding, Jedediah, but fuck, I don't even feel like I know you anymore. If you think of us as friends, then you need to actually have a friendship with me.
This is another way Jedediah has to actively uphold a relationship instead of just expecting it to be there when he wants it to be. Kind of like what he has to apply with Sydney. He is learning, as shown by him agreeing to letting Yvonne and Joshua ask him questions. They ask where Sydney went when he went missing. Turns out nobody was really convinced of Sydney's alibi. He answers that he doesn't know. They ask why Sydney has been acting weird since that. Jedediah responds with the possibility that he's meeting with the Elephant Man. They ask about other things. Jedediah says it's pretty much his fault, and his and Sydney's relationship is on the rocks. Yvonne asks if it's because Jedediah avoids Sydney all the time. It's satisfying to finally have someone confront Jedediah and not about not being great towards Sydney. Someone who's reasonable. Apparently they both have had communication issues for a while, so the issue isn't purely caused by whatever Jedediah is hiding, and the issues that arose from that. It just exacerbated existing issues that they both had. Sydney needs more help than Jedediah feels like he can provide.
Because I tried giving him everything he needed and I flunked out of college and ended up working for my fucking mom. And I'm still the only thing resembling a support system that Sydney has. And it's too much.
Jedediah feels like he has too much to fix, and he's the only one that can help Sydney. Even without everything going on this year, he's been overwhelmed, and he says that none of this is Sydney's fault. Joshua suggests that they just separate.
If you aren't willing to act like someone's friend, then it's wrong to feed them false hope that you might still have a connection with them.
Again, he does care about Sydney, but he goes on to explain that even if he didn't, cutting him off would leave him with nothing. Sydney needs medical treatment, food, a home, basic needs met, And that's what his involvement provides. Jedediah's parents paid for Cindy's college, apparently all because of him.
Even if I didn't care about losing him, cutting him off would not be an option. I'm responsible for his well-being. You get it? My parents sunk hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for his college. He wouldn't have passed his classes without me. I don't know if he'd even be alive without me. He has a job here, a place to stay, a steady supply of money and food because of me. You know Lucille. If she thought I didn't care about Sydney, he would be out of a job and a home.
And there's a nail in the coffin concerning Lucille and Cindy's relationship. For a while, Cindy seemed to believe that Lucille had some kind of genuine care for him. But from this statement, it seems like she never actually cared about him. She likes him, nothing more, nothing less, allowing him to be homeless or possibly die if her son wasn't too fond of him anymore. Which makes the times where Cindy seems to be hanging on to the hope that Lucille cares about him all the more tragic.
Yeah, his life, his parents, and the circumstances of his birth have left him without the resources or the ability to take care of himself, and he hates that more than I do, and it's not his fault. But he needs me. He needs me. And I love him. I love him more than anything, and I cannot do that to him. I just... God fucking damn it! What is going on outside?
I don't know.
During this, we hear what sounds like a crowd outside the cabin. Very much adds to the vibe, very ominous. And the first time I was listening to this, I didn't realize it was meant to be actually happening in the episode and wasn't just really strong ambient music that reflects Jedediah's hectic thoughts. But no, that's actually happening. As he's talking, he gets fed up with the noise and goes outside to see what's happening. And what-oh, Elijah's on the cabin's rooftop, giving a sermon to the crowd of further inflicted campers and counselors. Elijah talks about how they turn their backs on their muse, and by doing so they curse the universe. He talks about how the earth revolves around their muse and causes everything to function. Tomorrow night, there will be a ceremony to show their muse how much they adore him. He also calls them sheep. He fucking loves his shepherding metaphors. Very on the nose at this point.
Our dues and earn the love of our planet. No more storms. No more fire, disease, rot, or betrayal. No more apocalypse. All thanks to our muse.
What do you mean by, like, apocalypse? Like, metaphorical? Like, man, this shit sucks, it's apocalyptic. Or like something actually happened to cause an actual apocalypse. Everything seems to have mellowed out and just became the status quo. So it must have been a while ago if there was one. Along with it being the first time anyone has talked about an apocalypse. I really don't know if this is supposed to be literal or not. Probably not. Jedediah finds Lucille to try and get her to do something, but she silently walks away. I mean, come on. Both Jedediah and her don't seem to be afflicted by the fervor that Elijah can produce. Episode 31. Cindy apologizes for not keeping the kids as his #1 priority. The Elephant Man is dangerous. Also, the moon is still in the sky.
She probably has her reasons for being out during the daytime, but it's still irresponsible of her. There's really not enough room in the sky for her in the sun.
I think Cindy is projecting on the moon. Like, people call him irresponsible for trying to do what he says as enacting his free will. He also asks the kids to ask the moon if she needs help. Which is another thing Cindy craves, someone offering him help. Lunchtime. I'm assuming this is right after Elijah has had his speech. Despite Cindy agreeing to not say anything to scare the kids, he thinks since they're already scared, it might be a comfort.
All for the worship of an idol you don't even know by name. Now that the stardust has settled, I imagine most of you are confused and frightened by what you've been made to feel. You may be disturbed by how easily this stranger manipulated you. If that's the case, I urge you to cling to that feeling. Be uncomfortable. Be indignant. You're a person of your own, not his disciple, not his congregant, not his tool, not his at all.
It feels like he's particularly talking to himself here. He's speaking from experience as someone who was actively used as a tool by Elijah. He's upset that he was used like that and is telling them to do the opposite of what he did.
Thanks for listening. Lunch is the wolf. Have a secular afternoon.
Lunch is the wolf is a very funny phrase by itself, but I also think it could be a fun little extension of what Cindy was saying. You can call Elijah a wolf in sheep's clothing, or literally a wolf. He speaks on how he wants to shepherd the kids like sheep, and how earlier he clarifies he hunts and eats cattle he shepherds. And that kind of story is normally applied to wolves. And being compared to a wolf in its many forms could make sense because of this. So some metaphorical form of eating can be applied with Jedediah and the kids. So for lunch, having the sheep, the campers, eat the wolf feels like a momentary regaining of power. A reminder of what Cindy said, that they are not Elijah's to control. Dinner time! The moon's still in the sky.
She didn't choose to do what she does, you know? To be our chaperone through the night, guardian against shadows, sole and silent witness to a million secret moments of human frailty. She does it anyway, as well as she possibly can. But perhaps she's always wished she could play the part of the sun and herald dawn. Or perhaps she merely wishes she had the option.
I think this is another of Cindy projecting on the moon. He feels like he is forced to live the life he does. And autonomy is a big aspect of his character, so the moon acting out as a show of her autonomy could be something that speaks to Cindy. And he appreciates that about the moon and thinks that she's rad. Recorder. When he was young, kids didn't believe Cindy was malnourished because he wasn't thin. He explains that was primarily because the cheapest foods weren't exactly healthy.
What the other kids didn't understand, what I even didn't understand, was that being fed is not always the same as being nourished.
And Cindy had a dream about that situation, but food is replaced with love. In the dream, his peers were questioning how he could feel unloved if everyone's now paying attention to him. And Elijah certainly wants him.
But sometimes, you can be fed without being nourished. Sometimes you can be wanted without being loved.
He misses how close he and Jedediah were back then. Quote, and the centipede's back. Jedediah walks in and asks Cindy to tell him about the Elephant Man. And Cindy is incredibly honest. This is another greatly written section. And he said the Elephant Man told him he loved him, and he thought about what he wanted in a way no one has before. The man sees Cindy as an idol to devote himself to, and expects Cindy to fulfill that role, and he uses him to get what he wants. He knew Elijah was creepy and dangerous, but the possibility of equal love was so alluring. He was so desperate for this connection due to missing Jedediah.
I'm sorry. I wanted so badly to believe that you were fine. I wanted to believe it was over. I wouldn't have to ruin anymore. What do I break now? Sydney, at this point, what do I do?
This repeats why Jedediah may have been so dismissive of Cindy, being in danger in a way. He was in denial about it and hoped it would just pass. He seems to have seen Cindy go through some pretty bad things, so he didn't want to think it could happen again. Now that he feels he fucked everything up good in his life, he's just lost. Episode 32. The moon has set, going back to its assigned duty. Cindy's safety has seemed to have taken priority, and the nurse's cabin is on semi-lockdown. The conversation last night seemed to be a breakthrough to Jedediah, that he needs to listen to Sydney and what he wants. Maybe Sydney's saying that Elijah seemed to take what he wants into account, and that being what made Sydney so interested in him is what finally broke through to him. Sydney's safety is now being taken into account in a way that he can actually see. Yes, Jedediah protecting the journals was him trying to protect Sydney, but Sydney didn't get why that would make sense. Sydney and Jedediah ordered a package. After Sydney shut off the recorder last night, they seemed to have a genuine conversation and came up with a game plan. Lunch. Campers have been reporting the Elephant Man's movements back to Sydney. He's been much more confident about his actions now. Elijah's actions seem much more confident now. Whatever Sydney's saying is cut off when he sees the Elephant Man's bare face pressed against the cabin's window and staring at Sydney. The fact that he's going in without his mask means he's planning to try and make Sydney fall asleep. Sydney goes over to the microphone and tries to ask someone for help. The acting and writing in this scene illustrates Sydney's panic very, very well.
He's still here. He's just looking at me. Where is everyone? Am I alone? No one's coming. Where's Jedediah? Someone help me. I'm alone with him. He's looking at me. Get away!
Then Jedediah bursts in the door with a gun he stole from Lucille. This scares Elijah off. This scene was very funny to me when I first listened to it. So a while ago I had this shitty joke I did with myself. Anytime some conflict or something I didn't like was happening in a piece of media I was consuming, I would out loud say, "What if he pulls out a gun?" Not funny, but it made me laugh sometimes. So, when I was listening to this episode, it was still dark out, I'm sitting on a bench before I need to get to class. I'm listening to this episode and I hear Sydney's panic and ask where Jedediah is. I chuckle and whisper to myself, what if he came in with a gun? And then he did. That moment was awesome. Very cool. Quote. Captain Dunbeetle was having a grand time. Sydney sees them walk over to the bonfire. He also sees them holding a jar of nightmare powder. Sydney puts two and two together and runs out of the protected nurse's office to try and stop it. And we hear Chekhov's nightmare powder fire off as the kids dump it into the bonfire. This is my favorite sound design moment of the show. It sure does sound like fucking nightmares. As that happens, the Tonys come in to deliver a package to Jedediah. Jedediah comes running up asking where Sydney is. Jedediah tries to jog the memories, but they only seem to remember Sydney as the curvy guy.
Yeah. Kind of a voluptuous fella.
You don't often see hips like that on a man.
It's refreshing.
That's exactly what it is, Tony.
Yes.
It's refreshing.
Yes.
I support it wholeheartedly.
So, we talking about the curvy guy?
There are some serious issues with identifying him that way.
Hey, by the way, Sydney is a trans man. It's not explicitly stated in the show, but he is. So, I think that makes the joke funny. They finally say they saw Sydney asleep and being carried away by a man in an elephant mask. I want to talk about this because in Sydney's point of view, whatever he just experienced must have sucked ass. We know he's kind of resilient towards nightmare powder. He says it has trouble conjuring up something worse than what he's actually already been through. It's also said later that Elisha's power cancels out the nightmare powder, so all he could do was pass out in his arms. Jedediah gets the package from the Tonys and runs off. Voicemail. Jedediah has a phone. He calls Lucille and leaves a voicemail catching up on everything.
I don't think anyone else in camp actually worships Sydney like this guy does. But he takes their fears and gives it a direction. I think they worship that. so they let him take Sydney away.
I think everyone is also pushed forward by the fervor he possesses himself. The closest anyone seems to be actually to supporting Elijah is Cabin Dunbeetle, but they seem to be more fond of him than Sydney. It also turns out that he ordered a mirror. Remember how Elijah was near a window when the power went out, and he started to freak out? They think it might be because he saw his own reflection. And the first time Elijah talks to Sydney, he says he can only see his reflection in the glass of Lucille's grandfather clock, implying that seeing his face in any other way would harm him. He asks Lucille to call the authorities, even though it's hard for her. If he doesn't make it back, he wants Sydney to know that he loves him. Episode 33/34. The finale of Season 1 of Camp Here and There. My throat hurts. Elijah is recording his sermon. He's on top of the tower they built, and he somehow stole. The crimson moon is out. He speaks about how shitty the world is, and how the creatures they pray to don't do anything. He says everything will be fixed if they open their hearts to their muse. The whole time the crowd is at least mostly influenced by his fervor and are fully on board with what he's saying. He calls them his cattle again, on the nose, and reveals the sacred text. He says that soon he wants the crowd to set the tower on fire, with Sydney on it, and make him eternal. I'm assuming he was planning on burning with Sydney, because I don't think there's a way back down from the tower that can easily be accessed. If that's the case, then Elijah may have wanted to make sure him and Sydney would be together forever. Before he starts to read from the journals, Jedediah runs up. Elijah calls him a quack and removes his mask, and Jedediah recognizes him. He accuses Jedediah of abandoning Sydney.
Everything I've done has been about him.
You lie, architect. You lied to my whole congregation, to my muse. And I'm so sorry, my little loves, that you must stand for this scandalous libel.
You can't hold him hostage over a barbecue pit and tell me I don't care about his well-being.
Little love is something I'm pretty sure Sydney called the kids at one point. And Elijah bastardizing something Sydney said out of genuine affection to the kids into some fake performance of care. Because while he might have sympathy for the sheep, it's nothing like what Sydney feels towards them. And Elijah clarifies why he has such disdain towards Jedediah. After life was restored to Sydney on the forest floor, and Jedediah abandoned him, and he continues to abandon him in the forest each year after summer ends and he leaves to travel the world or whatever.
10 months he spends away off where no one can find him, and he leaves our muse behind to stew in vile awareness, to rot all alone in this place where she keeps him like a prison. But remain I have, and remain I will. Though his tempter may have left him behind, our muse was never truly alone. I was always here, to watch him, to have him, to know his beauty in a way our poor architect never will.
I think Elijah thinks Sydney being kept alive is the same thing as him being held captive. Trying to burn him on the pyre is to release him from his mortal prison. After that, he can be what he deserves to be, something so much more, something eternal.
You motherfucker!
Language?
Fuck yourself!
There are kids here.
Elijah just cursed in front of the kids a moment ago, calling the world a fucking nightmare. Might be a reach, but it feels like he's imitating how he hears Sydney talk to the kids. He uses the exact nicknames he uses for the kids and uses rules that Sydney applies despite breaking them himself. The fuck yourself he does is great. It's the phase in the show I've repeated most. Jedediah says Elijah doesn't understand anything.
This man is beloved by our poor, misguided muse. He has earned the right to speak his mind.
Call him by his goddamn name!
So he says, I know nothing.
Another example of Elijah objectifying Sydney. Elijah reveals that he has the journals. In a panic, Jedediah tries to explain that if he reads it out, then everyone will die. Elijah gets the crowd to drag him away.
Christ, please! The kids, don't let them listen. Sydney, fuck! Sydney, can you hear me right now? The kids are in danger!
Silence!
This gets me. Like in a panic, the first thing Jedediah can think to say to get Sydney's attention isn't about Sydney's impending death or anything. Jedediah knows how much Sydney loves the kids. And, you know? And I'm just gonna put this rant here. Okay, so you remember that scene a while back where Elijah ran into Sydney while stealing a tea set from a camper? And he seemed to make an attempt to kidnap Sydney. Sydney described this as Elephant Man giving into the temptation to steal him away. For the Elephant Man, this truly was a moment of weakness, I think, because he has this whole plan for how he plans to get Sydney, and part of it is that doing it alone, and part of it is that he does it alone, so there isn't as much suspicion on him, and he can privately talk with Sydney. Everything would go to shit if he took him from the campground, then where everyone would clearly see this happen. But Elijah wasn't thinking about that at the moment. He was so astounded by just being so close to Sydney that he really did almost give in to temptation. He almost ruined his plan so he could take him at that moment. The use of the word temptation I think is also notable, because Elijah's whole shtick is being Sydney's prophet. He applies a lot of religious language to himself and Sydney. Temptation is typically seen as a bad thing in religions, something that would lead you to sin. So even the story is describing what he wanted to do as sacrilegious, because it will ruin future plans, and his personal desires are getting in the way of that. Back to the actual episode. Elijah starts to read, and the pyre is set to light. The journals are Jedediah's diaries that he wrote in and around college. First entry is the last chronologically. Sydney's in the hospital. Pretty sure he was in a coma of sorts. And Jedediah is going to visit him. There was only one nurse he ever saw with Sydney. Creepy, tall, a man with very white teeth. The nurse was very attentive towards Sydney. He leered over him and got quite close to him at times. He tried to subtly stop Jedediah from coming into the room and hover over him when he was. And this is where Jedediah recognizes Elijah. He was Sydney's nurse. Everyone in this show has gone to medical school. I'm assuming Elijah went to medical school. I don't know how he got in there. I guess that's one thing he might have over Jedediah. He has a medical degree. I just like the visual of Elijah trying to keep his composure about Jedediah in the hospital, because I imagine he's fucking fuming the entire time. Elijah finishes reading this entry, and he, along with the crowd, is in pain from hearing it. Then we jump to the earliest chronological entry. Jedediah broke into Sydney's dorm, and he seems to have gotten his hands on one of Sydney's journals. Sydney has described some kind of magic, but this isn't what he's looking for. It apparently doesn't seem to explain the things that Sydney can do. I don't think we know what impressive things Sydney can do exactly. I mean, he's an oracle, and he's really good at astral projecting. But other than that, I don't know. I mean, the way they just say that he's an oracle seems very casual and not like this fantastic feat that he specifically can do. He seems to want to know how Sydney performs what he does for something he has to do. And he's thinking about using incantations like code. Elijah's head hurts. The next entry comes chronologically next after the last one. And so is the next one after that. He tries to heal Sydney by using the magic Sydney believed in.
It's gotten me nowhere, and he's getting worse every day. I need to change tack. I'm not a medicine man. I'm an engineer. I don't heal people. I fix broken machines. And what's the first thing you do with the machine that isn't working right? You turn it off and back on again.
It's really fun how Jedediah phrases things. He continues to use words like code and hack to explain things he doesn't fully understand. Elijah did already say that he only understood machines, and he was completely right. I think he went to medical school for Sydney, to be with him through college, but mostly in hope to learn more about how to treat people, and maybe help Sydney in some way. Elijah and the crowd are in a lot of pain. He tries to read the next entry.
October 21st, 2018. I've successfully performed a transformative ritual on a pig from the anatomy lab. I believe
This is why Jedediah can't eat pork. It reminds him of what he did to Sydney. As Elijah tries to read the next entry, Sydney wakes up and pushes him off the pyre. And as he falls, we hear the grandfather clock chime. Sydney says he hopes Elijah dies, and Elijah is on the bridge of tears, calling Sydney a traitor. Jedediah was able to make his way to the tower with the mirror. He shows Elijah his face in the mirror, and he freaks out.
I'll kill you. Why aren't you dead? My muse, why aren't you dead? My muse, my heart, it's screaming, my heart.
His own powers doesn't seem to affect him in the way it affects most others. It seems to cause him severe mental distress. Another cameo of Elijah's accent, yippe, and he drops the pretenses of a religious avenue, and just explicitly says he wants Sydney dead. Well, I'm sure he still holds his reasons that he said before. Him just saying dead feels like a tonal shift. Recorder. He was heard from when Jedediah got him down from the tower. They got Elijah back to the camp, but under Lucio's watch, he got away. Oh no. Jedediah says the journals were burnt in the fire. I do not fully believe that. Apparently, everything that was written in the journals were things that everyone else involved forgot, or they were forced to forget by some outside force. And Jedediah spells out exactly what's going on. October 18th, Sydney died, and hearing this fact physically hurts Sydney. Jedediah says he brought him back but doesn't remember the specifics, which I do not believe. At least I think he remembers more than he's letting on completely. And he doesn't want to say how he died. He says it's because the information resists being known and it kills people who try to learn it. Hence his father, which we learned about in the poetry episode, that his father died after hearing about this. He admits that Sydney's death was his fault.
The things I did to you, the stuff that killed you and the stuff that saved you, horrified me. You became this walking reminder of everything that had gone wrong in my life. So I avoided you. I avoided myself. And I'm sorry. Might still be something I have to work through, but we'll work through it together. Because I'm nothing without you, Sydney. I really am. I'm the ugliest, emptiest nothing.
I don't think Sydney's death was his fault. Well, at least that'd be a weird way of phrasing it. Because I think that it was like fully premeditated, that it was actively Jedediah. Just my fault. Sounds very softer than I killed you. In his diary, when debating how to fix Sydney's ailments, he uses a machine as a comparison. And he says to fix a machine, you typically turn it off and back on. I think Jedediah technically killed Sydney. Sydney seemed to be dying at the time, and it seemed to be the only thing Jedediah thought he could do. And whatever the thing he did was, also seemed fucked up from the way he's describing it. And Lord, he is so dependent on Sydney. I mean, they are so dependent on each other in general. I don't know if it's like an unpopular opinion. But I'm just as excited to see them get a healthier support network with other people as I am to see them get better together. Like, I like them a lot, but Christ, they need friends. To make sure the details he already told Sydney was safe in the first place, he told Elijah them first to see if he would die.
Yeah, he was kind of funny about it. He was like, the gospel as writ by the devil, like...
Wait.
Does Elijah still worship Sydney? if he just wasn't interested anymore. He's still gonna come back next season or like in a following season, but I feel like he'll be much less meticulous and lovey-dovey. Less like an obsessive crush and more like a stilted axe. Wait, who did Elijah think the journals were written by? Why was he shocked? It was like he didn't know exactly what was in it, but once he started reading, where do you think they came from? What do you think it was? I like how petty Jedediah was with how he was talking about Elijah. Sydney's actually kind of unnerved that Jedediah preferably wanted to kill Elijah. And when Jedediah tries to defend himself by saying that he tried to kill Sydney, he says Elijah didn't see it as trying to kill him.
He didn't understand it as ending my life. He wanted to make me immortal. Just like you.
Another Elijah and Jedediah parallel to go in the file. When Jedediah wants to make Sydney immortal, he tries to keep him alive. When Elijah tries to make Sydney immortal, he tries to kill him. I get that Elijah's intent was to make Sydney immortal.
It's kind of scary how willing you are to defend him.
Well, I find it kind of scary how willing you are to kill him.
I guess we're both dangerous people in our ways.
If you say so.
Something kind of sexy about it though, right?
Jedediah!
in a conceptual way.
I don't have anything to say about this, I just really wanted to leave this bit in. They started talking about being in a relationship officially, but Jedediah does not think he deserves it. So, after Sydney pause, Jedediah officially asks him to be his boyfriend.
Okay.
I have to work on my project.
Right. That's fine. Let it out.
I have to cry over a picture of you in my office, alone. My sobs are synced up with the ticking of my many beautiful clocks.
Jesus, no holds barred.
There was something I would have said earlier here, because it feels like it fits better. So the photo being referenced is one Elijah stole earlier on, and the photo just being of Sydney, and that the both of them feels notable, because Jedediah would have had every opportunity to take a photo of both of them. This might be a reach, but I think this might reflect his own self-resentment, and how he doesn't feel worthy enough to be included with Sydney, and would taint whatever memory that it embodies. This might also show his guilt again, that he just earlier stated that he feels like he doesn't deserve to be with Sydney, so this doesn't feel like much of an offshoot from that. One announcement. Last day of camp. He apologizes for what happened, and says the Elephant Man is gone. Cabin Dung Beetle has succeeded the separating from the camp, and will start their own camp across the lake next year. So due to them not having a cabin, Juniper and Rowan will be co-counselors together next year.
Joshua, take care too. I mean it.
Yay! He says goodbye to everyone and wishes the kids good luck, and he says he loves them. Jedediah's chess game. Jedediah and Lucille are having a conversation. She awkwardly tells Jedediah that she's proud of him, and how he handled the situation with the Elephant Man. Jedediah questions if Lucille feels guilty about something because she's trying to be vulnerable in a way. Lucille wants to play chess, and he relents. Turns out Lucille also doesn't know what his project is. And remember, we also still don't know what it is. We just know about the journals and the reanimation. It turns out at the pyre when he was taken away by some counselors, they tried to bury him alive. Which, I don't know, maybe it's closely similar to some kind of death like Sydney. I don't know. Jedediah doesn't plan to be away all summer this time, and actually plans to visit Sydney. Yay! Lucille seems to think Sydney only likes talking to hear his own voice. And again, Lucille doesn't understand Sydney. Jedediah argues against this. Lucille wins the chess game and apologizes for not doing anything about Elijah. But Jedediah catches that no one ever told her that name. She plays dumb until she reveals that they met once 7 years ago. 4 years before Sydney died, Elijah came to the camp in the winter, looking for Sydney with a knife.
For all I knew, Sydney was dead, and I told the man as much.
Elijah seemed so much more erratic than he was throughout the show, switching between begging and threatening Lucille. The fact that she showed up with a knife is odd. This is before Sydney was even working there, so how he assumed he was working there, I don't know. She said that she didn't know where Sydney was, and that she'll tell him if she did, but she never did tell him, so says Lucille. Jedediah is reasonably upset about her not doing or telling anyone anything. About her not doing or telling him anything. She says that there were only 2 things that could have stopped Elijah. One being killing him, which she says Jedediah would not have done. But as shown through multiple moments in the show, if he thought something was a genuine threat towards Sydney, he would have done anything to prevent it. He was just completely fine with potentially killing Elijah, like an hour ago. And there's apparently either metaphorical or literal bodies at the bottom of the lake caused by Jedediah. While he didn't think he was a threat for a while, I think that story that Lucille told about someone coming to the camp with a knife looking for Sydney would have, I don't know, made him a little worried. Would have at least made him maybe a little suspicious and open to stepping in earlier than he did. Option 2 being if Sydney stood up to Elijah. And Sydney wouldn't listen to Lucille if she told him to, apparently. What does standing up mean? When Sydney during their meeting told Elijah to fuck off, I really don't think that would have done that much. Maybe even made Elijah more violent. I think Lucille showing care about Sydney and telling him of a possible threat would have actually made Sydney kind of happy that someone cared about him and was like talking to him about it, and with just a conversation. Like, I'm not saying like if she went up to him and just like genuinely talked to Sydney, I think he would have like kind of been open to that. And yes, in the isolated situation that happened on the pyre when Sydney pushed Elijah off the tower and told him to go fuck himself, Sydney standing up for himself did save the day. But you know what I mean when I say that I don't think that justifies what Lucille said. Jedediah says that Sydney and him actually pretty easily figured out a weakness, and it was mirrors. So no, there were other things that they could have done to stop him. He knows that she's smart and could have figured it out, especially if she had told him everything and they worked together. Overall, if he was established as a threat by Lucille earlier, things would have worked out better. He's gonna tell Sydney about this so she can't make herself seem better. Lucille asks if he hates her and Jedediah says he doesn't. They say they love each other and he leaves the room. The tape clicks off and we hear the tape being taken out of the cassette. Wait, how do we hear the tape being shut off? And that's the end of Camp Human There, Season 1. What? Wait, what? What do you mean check the description? Anyways, foreshadowing. Before we get into that, I want to talk about foreshadowing. Hints and irony, and the show drops these pretty frequently. Like, the show doesn't really format its mystery around a aha moment. If you're watching it, you probably kinda knew what was happening before Elijah told Sydney. Not fully, but enough for it not to be a total shock during the reveal. Instead of shock, these moments of revelation around Sydney's death feels foreboding, at least to me. And after the audience knows about that big plot point, we're left with the curiosity around the details, which were much more shocking to me. I had more of a reaction, like a at the moment intense reaction to finding out that Elijah was Sydney's nurse than learning Sydney died. And I really like this. It forces you to think about the details, implications, and what Sydney's death could mean, more than the fact Sydney has just died and been brought back. Because we were slowly and gently equated with that notion. I don't know if I'm describing this well or if it's even accurate, but I don't know. Whatever they did, I enjoy. I just want to go through one more time and point out other little moments. These moments will specifically only be around Sydney, and definitely won't be all of them. Episode 2, Sydney says at one point he has tried to have been used in a ritualistic sacrifice before, somewhat similar to how he was almost set on fire in the finale for religious reasons. In episode 6, jabberbeaks are flying around, and if you listen you can hear which day of the week you die, to which Sydney says, I hear a different day every time, and boy, does that raise a lot of questions, like, am I immortal? Am I already dead? And yes, he is already dead. Episode 14, Sydney says, they say not to eat the seeds or you'll grow a pumpkin in your stomach, and it will steal all your nutrients until you wither and die. That's supposed to be discouraging, but I, for one, would be pretty excited for such a turn of events. To create life just by living, to feed myself directly to nature, to exchange my mortal existence for that of a noble squash, sounds positively romantic. I've always wanted to be killed by something that loved me, and that's what almost happened. Elijah loved him so much, took Sydney and manipulated him, and tried to take his life for his own purpose. Episode 18, Sydney was talking about how he and Jedediah would play house and make up fake kids. And one time it was a pile of acorns which later cracked open and revealed maggots. Jedediah was disgusted and scared by them, but when he was forced to flush these bugs down the toilet, he was heartbroken. Quote, if he didn't value these creatures when they were alive, why was he so affected by their deaths? Which is very similar to how he treated Sydney, that he cared so much to keep him alive, but he didn't really nourish or take care of their relationship after the fact. Fruity the fruit fly was a metaphor for how Jedediah still loved Sydney but didn't know how to properly uphold and nourish his relationship and so was really hurting him. In the same episode, the acorn maggot thing happens, and unlike the Fruity story, it seemed less obvious. With full context, it's very clear reaction how Jedediah treated Sydney. Sydney's death and it being his fault fucked him up, and even looking at Sydney caused him distress. And Elijah said that Jedediah's love of Sydney was the only thing that reached him, and he did everything to save Sydney then abandoned him. It wasn't valuing Sydney, but is doing so much to keep him around. The whole correlation between the reanimated rabbit and Sydney and Jedediah ripping it apart as to not alert the magical authorities to keep Sydney safe from them. We didn't know why this was apparently bad for Sydney before, but it's most likely because Sydney himself is a magical anomaly. The clock of meantime that ticks down to when the next big event is, which seems to be death, and Jedediah urging Sydney not to listen to it because of his past experience with death. The Cardinal. Sydney wants to research the mold that Soren made that was supposed to make the camp immortal. Then Jedediah gets pissed off at Soren for not understanding reanimation, because Jedediah obviously has a deep understanding with it. Jedediah's fixation on wall safe, which is supposed to tell someone when a loved one dies, and how to prevent it. Jedediah talks about how he doesn't need it anymore, maybe because he must believe that Sydney dying isn't an issue anymore, but he obviously is still freaked out by the notion. And Elijah's powers, intent and obsession, is subtly hinted at even before Sydney met him, such as him being described as wanting to steal Sydney away so bad that time when he was still in a teapot. Of course, there are a lot more that hints at everything, but this is just stuff from the top of my head. Okay, the descriptions below each episode. Hi. I need to tell you guys something. Camp Here and There is found footage, or whatever the audio version of that is. The audio is being collected and analyzed by an organization that may be affiliated with the government. Everyone at the camp is being studied by agents and seem none the wiser. This makes the audio cues we sometimes hear between segments, like the tapes being taken out or inserted into a recorder. This makes the audio cues we sometimes hear between segments, like the tapes being taken out and inserted into the recorder, things that are actually happening, which makes sense because we now know that it was someone recording the recorder from a separate device, so we can hear things going on with the recorder. And as revealed later in the descriptions, they are written by someone who has the alias Agent 7. And I also have one other thing to reveal. I never fully read the descriptions while I was watching the series, which is, I honest to God, like I listened to Camp Here and There over 20 times when between like just doing things. I listened to this a lot, I just never really bothered to look down there. This is for multiple reasons. I just didn't want to know about it for a while, and once I did find out about it, I wanted to keep it a surprise for my future self. And everything I knew about it was from live streams and just slightly skimming it a while ago. So this is mostly like first interpretations, like for me. At least more so than the actual episodes. Okay, the descriptions refer to the characters using different terms. So when that comes up, I will clarify what is being referred to. Again, I'm sorry I'm not going to bring up everything that's written down, and I might just skip full ones. So if I just don't mention an episode, that's why, because it's just nothing. Okay, episode 1, the intro episode. Audio data from various sources detailing the events which occurred at Site 2 on day 952. Site 2 refers to the camp. Why it's not the primary site if they're studying the stuff that goes on in it, I don't know. 952 is the amount of days in which they've been studying the camp, I assume. Because of Sydney being a magical anomaly, I assume they're studying him primarily. Sydney's been working at the camp for 3 years, and 952 days is about 2.5 years, so maybe they found him not long after? It states that this episode gives insight on characters such as Jedediah, Sydney, and Lucille, Entity 1, 2, and 3 respectively. The numbers seem to correlate to assigned importance, so Jedediah seems to be more important to these people than Sydney. Which I guess makes sense. If you're interested in reanimation, you'd want to know how it was done. So the 1 and 2 make sense, but Lucille? Why are they interested in her? Does she know more about what happened? Quote, the dataset seems to confirm the existence of the previous theoretical Entity 9. It displays marked interest in Entity 2, and possible chthonic aptitude. In light of this knowledge, I motion that Entity 9 should be immediately elevated to Entity 4. Entity 9 is Elijah, and was a point of interest to the organization before he made direct contact with Sydney. After the hospital. They didn't seem to know if he existed, so they can't have known him through being Sydney's nurse, but he has had tangible enough effects that have brought him to their attention. They take note of Elijah's powers, so they also previously didn't know about that, and he should be a higher priority because of it. Episode 2, the episode where the penguins kidnap Sydney and extort the camp for fish. Quote, it can be reasonably assumed that all entities, with the possible exception of Entity 4, are now aware of the existence of Site 3 and its resident anomalies. The consequences of this are difficult to predict. Elijah did get promoted from Entity 9 to 4. Good for him. Site 3 is the tunnels, and I guess Elijah did not know about them. With this, fun fact, this is the thing that got me to take out my old theory that was in one of the episodes because it hinged on Elijah knowing about the tunnels. Episode 3. Rowan is described as Entity 9 and Soren as Entity 7, and they are noted because of their abilities. Quote, Entity 1 has always been awkward, but its hesitance to interact with Entity 2 is more marked this cycle than ever before. Now that it is, not that it is my place to theorize, but I presume the guilt is catching up. They're also getting kind of invested, I think. Further clarification is given that the organization somehow knows what Jedediah did, Jedediah says this knowledge resists being known, and trying to learn about it could kill someone, yet these people seem fine. This shows a level of dehumanization. Also, the way that they're being described shows the level of dehumanization, and everyone being referred to as it, as an attempt to be purely analytical. Episode 4, the episode with the Gravediggers comes in and puts on a show of reanimated corpses. Quote, "On account of the insight this data provides about the behavior of Entity 13, I motion that it be immediately evaluated to at least Entity 5 status. Because of Soren's seeming rise in inclination towards immortality, the desire to act on this has made this organization more interested in him, enough to put him below Elijah in importance." Quote, "Also, once again, I respectfully suggest that Site 4 and its inhabitants are summarily destroyed. Anomaly 7 is decidedly not a suspect in our investigation, and has served little more than a sickening distraction. Agent 7 is suggesting that the death fields and the gravediggers be taken out. Her form of reanimation is of no interest to them, maybe because of what she inflicts not being actual life. So her being some kind of shitty imitation of what they're trying to study might be annoying, along with her being a semi-regular annoyance to the camp. Episode 5, Opposite Day, brings insight into the behavior of Entity 10. Seems like Entity 10 is someone who I don't remember if I mentioned. I really don't think I mentioned them. Camper Natsume Shiota. The only camper seemingly important enough to be noticed by the organization, possibly because they're more magically inclined. They are also from Camp Dunbeetle and might be a later threat because they're one of the kids that separated at the end of the season. Quote, Entity 3 has a cell phone. What? They seemed shocked by this, maybe because they know that there's no internet out in the camp. Or they just don't want anyone having outside contact. I don't know, I just think this feels notable. Quote, as Agent 23 refuses to listen to my personal requests, I'm now petitioning it directly to you. Please tell her to stop giving my files poetic titles. They are case files, not chapters in a storybook. I guess that is where the episode titles come from. An annoying co-worker who's invested enough in what's happening that they want to add poetic titles. I like that. I really do. They seem cool. Episode 6. The episode where Cindy makes contact with Elijah when he's still in T-set. Quote, apparent habitual interests in various suspects, namely Entity 9, Entity 5, Entity 10, and Entity 6. I'm pretty sure those are Rowan, Soren, Natsume, and Yvonne. I don't know what this means, and I'm pretty sure like I had to figure that out by going onto the fucking wiki, so I don't know. Entity 3 keeps a suspicious number of clocks on for someone supposedly chthonic. I think the word chthonic is being used for people who have notable abilities that are recognized by the organization. Lucille has a magical inclination, I guess, with her mannequins, the Friends of the Oak, and everything else. I don't think the show mentions her having a lot of clocks outside of the grandfather clock. While the clock is really important, are the clock's substitutes or amplifiers for magic? Because to say it, it's weird for someone who's chthonic to have clocks, or like have that amount of. And also, I forgot to mention this earlier, the grandfather clock is described as mahogany, like notably as a mahogany clock. The one that Elijah steals. And I think when mentioning in the episode, the poetic episode where they talk about the clock of meantime, Cindy says that not only like quartz can make clocks, because I think Jedediah says something like only that mineral has the capacity to handle time or clocks. I don't remember it that well right now because again this is like half a year later from when I recorded the first part. Is the clock like fully mahogany or does it just have like a mahogany like shell? Because they just say mahogany like it's no issue, so I don't know if I'm like reading too much into it, but like they notably state that only like quartz can hold time. So like I guess I know the clock is special, but like that seems notable. I just want to bring that up. Quote, I seriously suggest we focus more resources on determining whether Entity 4 was actually involved in the limb, because if it's not a suspect, then it absolutely needs to be eliminated before it carries out whatever the hell kind of ritual it's preparing for. What the fuck is the limb? Apparently the actual definition of the word limb has something to do with painting or illustrating on a canvas, and the descriptions seem to change the meaning of the word slightly, such as chthonic, which literally means concerning, belonging to, or inhabiting the underworld. But that by itself doesn't make sense in context, but in a live stream, at least concerning Elijah, it has to do with his abilities. So what could limb mean? Maybe it has to do with creation, and the only thing that I know Elijah might be involved with the organization is, and the only thing I know Elijah might be involved in that the organization is interested in is Cindy's reanimation, which may be applicable to the word limb. Jedediah created new life for Sydney, and considering that they're studying what happened between Sydney and Jedediah, it would be odd for the limb to be something completely unrelated. They don't want Elijah to interfere with their studies if he's not involved with anything important, so they might want to kill him. Episode 7, the goo episode. Quote, the appearance of the goo implies, to me, that a chthonic magician's abilities got out of hand somewhere on site. But who? Perhaps considering that Entity 2 is so strongly smoke-aligned, it was somebody with a vendetta against him. I don't know. I don't know who has a specific vendetta against him. Maybe Lucille? Maybe Lucille. Quote, not excited for tomorrow. Are you certain that Agent 15 and 16 are the right people for this job? I mean, are you absolutely certain? Hey, hi. The Tonys are part of the organization. Is this organization in cahoots with the black market? Or are they themselves the black market? Because the Tonys are supposed to be black market delivery men. Their package had the right symbol, and they apparently do have contraband. Episode 8. The Tonys come with Jedediah's package. Quote, please remind Agent 15 and 16 that they were not sent to play mind games with the suspects. As much as I regret this fact, they are professional investigators and should behave as such or be fired. So the Tonys are just actually fucking with Jedediah. Love that they're invested enough in the story of Cindy and Jedediah to explicitly not like Jedediah and want to fuck with him, and like Sydney enough to go out of their way and root for him and compliment him. Makes all the comments a more explicit fuck you to Jedediah. Episode 9, first mediation episode between Yvonne and Joshua. Quote, Entities 6 and 7 continue to fail to bring up the topic of Entity 1's pre-limb exploits. Either they are faithfully keeping Entity 1's secrets, or have been both stripped of their memory of what they once knew. The second option seems more likely, so they want to learn what led to the reanimation and are upset that Joshua and Yvonne failed to bring it up. And the limb is definitely related to Cindy's death and reanimation thing. I'm pretty damn sure they don't know what really happened, and what he says about their memories being stripped is probably true. Jedediah said that the knowledge of what happened resists being known, so it would make sense for anyone who did know to forget. I just never considered Joshua or Yvonne ever even knowing about it, and knowing something that needed to be forgotten. Episode 10, the war episode. Quote, I can't help but notice that Agent 23 continues to editorialize. Don't you think she's overstepping? Please admonish her. Agent 7 seems to be the only one treating this like a study and not having fun with it. Episode 13, Soren reanimated a rabbit episode. Quote, frustrated by the lack of insight into Entity 1's feelings and opinions on Entity 5's necromandarin. Frustrated by the lack of insight into Entity 1. Even Agent 7 is getting frustrated by how much Jedediah is hiding things. Of course, they're suspecting a more intense reaction because of his experience with necromancy. Episode 14. Quote, Agent 23's latest office betting pool is over the identity of the goo thief. Entity 4 is the favorite among my colleagues, but I think you'll agree with my inclination that the calling card is not its style. Another popular pick is Entity 5 and even Entity 2. They are referring to the red candle and the smell of mischief left by the one who cleaned the bathrooms for Sydney. Again, I love the idea that the agents are genuinely invested in what's happening and are treating it like a soap opera. Man, look at these idiots, they don't know about the entity pervading Sydney's dreams, whose calling card is definitely the smell of mischief. Episode 16. The episode where everyone gets very sleepy. Quote, possible confirmation of the continued existence of Entity 0. Adam? Entity 0? These entities are categorized by their importance to the case, right? Does 0 mean that he's above Jedediah as Entity 1? And he's the most important to the case? Or just that his importance is to be determined and he is important somehow? Also, confirmation means that they suspected his existence before, and acknowledged him as more than a man from Sydney's dreams. Agent 7 is very upset at the Tonys for their extreme unprofessionalism, and thinks there should be a court case about it. Episode 17. The like episode where Elijah 6B's on the camps as a distraction to try and get the journals. And unlike the other notes sections that have, notes, this one just says, quote, oh finally. I assume this is because Jedediah confirmed the existence of the journals after Elijah tried to steal it. And that kind of information is something that Agent 7 or the organization needs. Episode 18. The kids get hypnotized by the beehive. Quote, insight is brought to fear responses of various personnel. That never clicked for me before that the hive scaring the counselors was also showing off their base fear responses. While I can talk about other characters with this, I want to talk about Sydney and Jedediah. When Sydney is faced with the full brunt of the fear that is induced by the hive, he tries to push through and do something, and Jedediah hunkers down and tries to protect Sydney. This shows qualities that we already know about them, but I think this is a fun way to illustrate it. Quote, you'll have to forgive me for struggling a bit with the final clip. It involved audio data which I went to rather extravagant, only to find that Agent 23 has recorded one of her programs onto the tape. That just explained the shuffling noise we hear before Jedediah talks to Lucille. Agent 7 really is the only one taking this seriously. Episode 19. The episode where Sydney and some people get trapped in the forest trying to take down Soren's altar. Quote, I believe this is the first time Entity 2 has visited Site 1 since the Lind. The man note, the fact that Entity 5 built its altar there cannot be a coincidence. The proximal effects Entity 2 described reminds me of hypoxia. For one, I fucking told you the camp had magical abilities, I was right. And Site 1 is the forest, and considering it's important as Site 1, and the continued reference of Sydney's death in the forest, maybe Sydney was specifically reanimated near the camp. So yeah, the grounds are special, like Soren said, and what has been hinted at, but the grounds seem specifically good at reanimation. Hypoxia is when cells, tissue, and organs receive too much oxygen. I don't know why the forest will make that happen to Sydney. Maybe it's still trying to revive him, because he's still technically dead, but he's already kind of alive, so the breath of life it's trying to bestow is too much. This also might be happening because of the added effects of the altar. Episode 20. Audio data from various sources detailing a private meeting which occurred at Site 2 on day 969. Audio data from various sources detailing a private meeting which occurred at Site 2 on day 969. in parentheses, nice, Agent 23. She does go back into the quarters just to make a joke about the funny haha sex number. Quote, Agent 23. Even from across the train, I can sense that dirty joke percolating in your wicked little heart. They're on a train? I guess they're going somewhere. I really like Agent 23. She's known apparently for these shitty little jokes and adores them, enough to sign off on it and put it into a very important document, I'm presuming. Episode 21. This is the episode where Sydney's wandering off into the woods and Jedediah's panicking over the announcements. Agent 7 questions why Sydney's writing is impossible to understand and questions if it was somehow caused by the limb. If that was the case, it would make sense because Jedediah is the only one that remembers the limb and can also understand Sydney's writing. But I'm not exactly sure how exactly. Episode 22, the episode where Elijah talks with Sydney. Quote, so Entity 4 seeks to understand the limb. Join the club, I suppose. I would say these revelations warrant a repositioning on the suspect list, except that certain members of our cohort have informed me that my habit of changing entities' numbers is quote-unquote annoying. A suspect list? A suspect for what? I assume suspects to who caused the limb? But they know it's Jedediah. At least that's what he was primarily involved with, is maybe the limb is something else? Quote, that said, if what he said about the clocks is to be taken at face value, he's on the verge of earning himself an Entity 1 slot in a completely new case. I believe they're referring to Lucille's grandfather clock telling Elijah shit and being the only thing he can see his reflection in. Notable that they find this so interesting. Episode 23. In this episode, someone makes a mold to try and make people immortal and almost kills a few people. Agent 7 urges Agent 1 to do something about Soren because he might fuck up the crime scene. Quote, I urgently feel that we should put a stop to Entity 5 before it seriously damages what little integrity this reality has left. It's only a matter of luck that it hasn't accomplished anything sickening yet. I assume the limb has made this reality very sensitive because Jedediah messed with the laws of nature, and someone trying to do the same thing is putting everything in danger. Episode 24. This episode, Salem and Sydney are having the mediation episode. Quote, it's files like these which make Agent 23's whimsical naming conventions seem particularly offensive. These are people's lives we're documenting, not soap opera episodes. I like what this does for Agent 7. They seemed like they just cared about having the study maintain integrity. That aspect is still there, of course, but it shows that they at least care somewhat now, even if it wasn't always the case. Episode 25, the Hunt episode, the one with the fox. Quote, Entity Zero's Chthonic Camp Infiltration. Parentheses, question mark, what? I could have missed something big, but when was Adam hinted at this episode? Do you mean the moat? Did Adam make the moat? I swear, I was actually gonna joke about that originally when going over the episode, but it seems stupid. Did Adam make the moat? Episode 26. The wall climbing episode, and the one where Sydney tries to open the safe. Quote, the mover part of me says that emotional pressure incites confessions, but the human part of me wants to recommend that Agent 15 or 16 pop by and recommend these people a good therapist. This is another moment of Agent 7 being compassionate, and now that's kind of fighting with their one to learn more about what happened, and also write about the stress causing them to admit more. Episode 27, the poetry episode, and where Jedediah got the clock of meantime. Quote, you can be so reckless sometimes. You swore up and down that he would not remember. Did they give Jedediah the clock? Why don't they want him to remember getting the clock? Or do they not want him to remember its effects? Okay. Episode 28, the episode where the camp practices astral projecting. And Sydney has the dream where Adam reveals his name. Hypoxia again. The obvious conclusion is that Site 3 extends below Site 1. This is said in relation to Sydney freaking out in the tunnels. So the forest does not need the assumed amplifier that was Soren's altar. The effects of the forest can reach Sydney even underground. Episode 29, Sydney and Elijah talk. Quote, "It's Entity 1, right? We all know it's Entity 1. I believe he's referring to the architect being Jedediah. Agent 7 seems to be getting invested." Episode 30, the mediation episode between Yvonne and Joshua, where Jedediah reveals a lot about his past and emotions. Agent 7 questions how much memory the two have prelim, and more specifically of Jedediah's final year of college, because they clearly forgot something they should know. Episode 31, post-Elijah speech from atop the cabin, and Sydney reveals everything to Jedediah. Because the moon refusing to set, Agent 7 questions if it's because of the limb messing with reality, that its effects can reach celestial bodies. This further emphasizes how much Jedediah kind of broke reality by bringing Sydney back. I'm assuming that's what the limb is. Episode 32. In this episode, Sydney gets kidnapped by the Elephant Man, and the Tonys fuck with Jedediah. Because no one is doing anything about the Tonys, Agent 7 threatens to leave them stranded somewhere. The finale, episode 23/24. The episode has the pyre, and Jedediah and Sydney talk about everything and the chess game. Quote, "As per my duties as Agent 7, resident spoil sport, I must stop the boon celebrations by reminding my entire cohort Entity 1's journals are not admissible as evidence in our court. Remember, confessions not given under oath are as good as hearsay. As far as we can legally claim, the words Entity 4 read out might as well have been fanfiction." Big fan of the image of these agents popping champagne and collecting money over who won the bets after this episode. I'm assuming they're gonna try Jedediah in the court for fucking over reality. The fact that they have their own court would imply that this is a very wide-reaching facility, or maybe covers such a specific field that they need their own court or laws. Quote, "But goddamn if this doesn't feel good. I bet it would be satisfying to finally get an answer after almost 1,000 days of investigating. I imagine he'll be inclined to do some of our investigating for us." We're talking about Sydney. Hey, instead of calling Sydney an it, they called him he. They sometimes slip into the correct pronouns for the characters. The later into the show it is. So they might be getting more attached to the people at the camp as the study goes on. Quote, "In the meantime, I'm sure we're on the same page about our next steps. I just hope Entity 4 doesn't manage to catch a flight to Russian word. Put it on screen. I don't know that I can handle another transglobal train ride, especially if it takes us underwater again." Elijah's running away. That feels really weird to me. That feels really weird. Even when he was pushed off the pyre, or when he learned to die about the journals, it didn't seem like he gave up completely. Just that his attitude would change. The only thing I could think of that may cause him to freak out is Lucille saying something to him. Because remember, he escaped under her watch somehow. Apparently the town that he's going to apparently directly translates to apparently mean Archangel. I'm like calm right now, but you don't know how much this fucks with me. I ran to this by myself at random points. He can't have just given up. He must have gone back to Russia for a more specific reason. Oh, so I guess that answers why Agent 7 said that they were on a train. They're going to Elijah, maybe. Okay, we're done to descriptions. Now on to the next section. The songs. As I said a while ago in the hook, Will Word composed the music for Camp Here and There. Along with the music in the show, he made 4 lyrical pieces to go with it. These songs are made to represent 4 of the characters in the show. Those songs being When Somebody Needs You for Jedediah, Your Body My Temple for Elijah, To Urge to Be Human So Don't Be One is for Adam, and Venetian Blind Man is for Rowan. Most of these are characters that fit together in a neat little category. Adam, Elijah, and Jedediah, all characters that have a massive impact on Sydney. and his story. Then there's Rowan. This is not a criticism, I just think it's funny. I'm not gonna do full lyrical analysis on these songs because I'm not good at them, and a lot of the analysis I could be able to do begins and ends with the characters they're based on. Venetian Blind Man, Rowan's song. Okay, Rowan is the Venetian Blind Man. Venetian blinds are a thing, and the ones with the turnable slats, like the blinds on the window. Rowan frequently talks about the blinds and keeping them closed. The song feels like it's Rowan talking himself down from a panic attack. The sound of the song, I don't know if this is the right descriptor, but it feels more like a folk, more of a folk song, which I really enjoy. It's got fun lyrics and a good sound. To err is to be human, so don't be one. Adam. To err is to be human, and to forgive is divine. This phrase is used to express that making mistakes is human and forgiving those mistakes is good. The act of forgiveness also puts you closer to godliness. The change of the phrase to err is to be human, so don't be one gives the alternative option to refuse humanity completely so you don't make mistakes, because making mistakes is inherently human. I like to think this continues on with a religious thing that some core characters have in common. I'll get into that later. For Adam, at least, shown in its title, his expression of religion is ignoring it, not rejecting it, mind you. The title implies an acknowledgement. A better word for it might be defilement. Being real, Adam is a character I don't really get. This isn't a criticism, and this doesn't mean I don't really like him, just like it didn't click that he was bad until I listened to that one live stream. I'm gullible. Just like it could just be me because I'm bad at reading into that kind of thing. I just thought that because he was helping Sydney, then there wasn't anything going on. Like, I knew there was something going on, but like bad. I didn't consider him as like a negative figure in like fully. Again, he just kind of confuses me. That could also just show he's good at manipulating people, which I think is what he's doing. To me, this song sounds like a really shitty therapy session between Adam and Sydney, where Adam sometimes says some decent statements, but it's surrounded by other things. This line, I'm just gonna read it out like an idiot. I could take your life if you're done with it, sweetheart. You still picking at that, only ate the good parts. I think it's a good example of what I mean. It gives sage advice about not only focusing on the parts of life that you want to, and the need to acknowledge the whole, but it also shows his vampirism by hinting that because of that his life is of better use to Adam, because he seems like he's done with it. I also kind of get the impression that Adam is somewhat teasing Sydney about all the things he doesn't know. Quote, "If you don't hate me, then reanimate me. Prove it to me, baby, lightning in my veins." It could just be about the repeated talk about reanimation. Feels like it's referencing Jedediah reanimating Sydney. I also just like this line. Are we on the same page yet? Are we on the same page yet? I'm getting old here. Come on, don't you get it? It seems like this line is referencing that one scene with... I don't think it's referencing anything because I think the songs are like not really written conjoined with an episode or like specific things. It was just trying to capture a vibe. But I just like thinking about it like this. It seems like this line is referencing that one scene where where Sydney is trying to learn where the journal is, and Adam rambles about what seems like non-related details at first, and asks Sydney to understand him in a similar fashion, and maybe another tease about Sydney not knowing what's happening to him. Yeah, I know there's more to say about this, but I don't want to fully get into the songs. The next song, Your Body, My Temple. This is Elijah's. This is Elijah's love song for Sydney. The title is kind of self-explanatory. Elijah worships Sydney in a pretty objectifying way. He emphasizes how important Sydney is and how he would do anything for him. Talks about how the world is fucked up and God has failed them, and the apocalyptic world sucks ass. And instead of worshipping this god he thinks failed him, he worships Sydney. and he has become his false god, hence the references to the golden calf. Quote, "You've got my whole world in your hands, got this little blue spot, and you got no idea how much this orbits around you, do you, honey?" In the podcast, it essentially says the same thing, that the Earth spins around Sydney and honors him. But in contrast, this line comes off as more serious. It just like the tone sounds less adoring. And I like that. I always kind of viewed this song as Elijah at his most visceral and near a breaking point. I like this song. It kind of adds to my idea about what Elijah truly wants. I like this song and it kind of adds to my idea about Elijah truly just wanting Sydney in a selfish sense. Even if he himself doesn't see it like that. He enjoys what Sydney can provide for him. Kind of feels like the song starts with some form of genuine care with the religious talk, but it seamlessly slips into a selfish worship, practically begging Sydney to accept his position as a false god. Quote, "Its essence goes over my head like a halo." This line reminds me of the dollar store halo line, and I like that. Quote, "I'll be your blessing in disguise, whip the mask off my good side." I mean, yeah, that's exactly what he initially presents himself as to Sydney, as someone who to deliver him from this dreadful life, where no one appreciates Sydney like he does. Quote, "I want to die so I can taste your name on my final breath." This line is just rad as hell. He was also totally planning on dying on that pyre with Sydney, just burning to death with him. Okay, Jedediah, when somebody needs you. Jedediah is trying to show Sydney that he cares about him in a way that contradicts what Sydney actually needs. And there's a whole lot of descriptors of the relationship. This song feels like Jedediah just reflecting on everything to me. The sound also specifically reminds me a lot of the In Case I Make It album that Will Wood made, and I like that. I'm not going into singular lines with this one. Okay, we're done with the songs. And now on to the religion section. So religion is clearly established as a motif throughout the show, and I kind of touched on that when talking about to always be human, so don't be one. And like a lot of it comes from the characters that somewhat revolve around Sydney, which also kinda includes Soaring. I also need you to know that I don't really know a lot about religions in general. I'm mostly interested in how it behaves in the story poetically. And when I say religions, the story mostly deals with, I think the word is Abrahamic religions, like Christianity, Jedediah. We're doing this character by character. Jedediah. I'll start by talking about Jedediah. We know he was raised religious. I'll start by talking about Jedediah. We know he was raised religious, and so says the creators, Protestant. In college he wore a cross necklace, and everyone seemed to passively know him as the religious kid. This will be fucking embarrassing if I'm wrong, but I don't think he's ever currently described as wearing that cross necklace or any other, or anything else. I think this is notable. The necklace was an obvious signifier of his faith, and he wore it all the time. Or at least enough for him to, again, have everyone know him for it. If he did continue to wear it after college, I think there would have been a comment about it, possibly. A comment on it before episode 30, and even still, it's in past tense. So I think so maybe he stopped wearing it? And maybe he stopped wearing this expression of faith during college? And we all know what happened in college. The story concept of a character losing their faith after a loved one dies is common, but not bad by any means. But the added itty-bitty detail of Jedediah bringing back his loved one after death, it kind of flips the concept on its head. Where the initial idea typically comes from the idea of why would a god let this happen, this new thing adds to that initial grief with I can fix this myself. I'm not suggesting Jedediah has a god complex or anything, because just fucking look at the man. He doesn't have I don't think he has. I just mean maybe the combination of grief and the gained capabilities that were previously only understood as impossible or something only a god of some sort could do could cement a loss of faith. I was gonna take, and the bit that I just read, I was gonna take it out because I'm very likely wrong about the cross necklace thing. It was there for a while and I don't have the heart to take it out at this point. And like, who cares? This video is this whole thing is already so long. Was a couple more minutes about me just was a couple more minutes of me just talking out of my ass about a stupid detail that's not true. Most likely. But anyways, Jedediah religious concept 2. Though this can still technically work as in conjunction with my last point. If you want to view it like that, whatever, who cares. Savior complex. As shown by everything he does and a lot of what he says, he thinks of himself as a protector of Sydney, that he is the one person alone with the capability or knowledge to fix everything. The savior complex is considered unhealthy most of the time, due to how it affects everyone involved. The person or whatever that is being saved may not want this help, but it is being thrusted upon them. This may actually hurt the person, and they might feel belittled to or condescended to, and the savior may overextend themselves and feel they are shouldering too many burdens. There is more to it, but I want to keep this mostly related to Sydney and Jedediah. Sacrificing oneself to help others is typically associated with religious teachings, sometimes seen as a good thing for someone to do and as something that brings someone closer to God. Though I don't think this is a motive for Jedediah at all. I think that it can be interesting that him trying to save Sin. Though I do not think this is a motive for Jedediah at all. But I do think that it can be interesting that him trying to save Sydney accidentally resembles some kind of warped religious journey. Elijah, while Sydney might be the cause of Jedediah's loss of faith, maybe, who knows, who cares? Sydney is Elijah's faith. I was gonna hold off on the direct comparisons between them for a little bit, but I will talk about it. Elijah did say that he was raised religious, but his old belief system seemed to be something that he dropped in interest of worship in Sydney. But it still might influence how he does conduct worship. He said that at first he tried to resist the calling of Sydney, whatever that means, but soon came around and became utterly obsessed with him. Elijah's love seems to be devotion over care, not the love someone would normally have for a person, but some kind of higher being. His belief seems to have somewhat corrupted his idea of love. I have more things I could say about Elijah here, but I will be getting into theorizing, so I think it'd be better suited for another section. But I will try to give a heads up for when I get to the section that could also work here. I don't remember if I did. Adam! Okay, here's one thing I wasn't really gonna bring up. And I don't know if this is a good idea to bring up. But Adam's a demon, question mark. Not exactly a demon in the way that people really understand, but more of just a being of tomfoolery. Something that just generally sows chaos. I don't know, just go watch the live streams or something, they say it there. I wasn't gonna bring this up because I don't think Adam being a demon is specifically shown yet, like there's nothing, I don't think there's a lot directly connecting it currently. Yes, him being some kind of ethereal being, the Christian symbology and the smell of mischief surrounding him, hints at some kind of demon shit. but it's never expressly confirmed in the show yet. So it feels like I'm spoiling something by even saying this, but this is talked about so openly in the live streams, so I have to assume this is something they don't think needs to be withheld. But again, the word demon seems so important when there's a violent priest running around with Abrahamic tendencies. And Adam, this demon, is guiding the priest's object of devotion. Elijah believes the world revolves around Sydney, and Sydney is the only person to have died and came back, which kinda does connect him to death in some way. So Adam's interest in Sydney does seem kinda entrenched in all of that. As I previously said in the song section, I think Adam's expression of religion is defilement or ignoring it, or just using it as a way to manipulate. Like Elijah, like he's earnest with it. Jedediah is kind of like has like a warped relationship with it, it seems, and there's like a specific relationship with that kind of thing with a lot of the main characters, like main people circling around Sydney currently. One of the interactions we heard about Adam and Sydney is Adam offering him an apple, which is typically used as the fruit of knowledge from the Bible, which is typically used to represent the fruit of knowledge from the Bible. Like in most media, it's depicted as an apple of some kind. He's also named Adam, which is a notorious character from the Bible. The first man. And again, as said in the song section, to err is to be human, so don't be one. It encourages the rejection of humanity and man's opportunity to reach a level of divinity by choosing forgiveness. He gives an option outside of humanity, which seems to also be separate from divinity. I don't think this is intentional, but to me this feels pointed at Sydney. He's not a normal person anymore, no matter how much Jedediah wants him to be. And he's not some divine figure like Elijah thinks he is. He's meeting Sydney in the middle by rejecting both, and at least guiding him effectively through some of the things that are happening around him, and acts as a therapist sometimes, whether he does or doesn't have good intentions. And I do think Adam is manipulating Sydney for season 2. I do think he's manipulating Sydney for his own reasons, and I think that will be shown more in season 2. Son is the only character that expresses some kind of religion, some kind of religious belief that doesn't have some form of interest in Sydney. He's got his stone mommy, but I don't think this lack of interest will last, because he's actively looking for a way to achieve eternal life, and if we look over to our left, we see Jedediah, who has accomplished this. We see Jedediah, who has accomplished his deepest desire. It's too perfect for him not to get involved. The use of religion in the story seems to be commonly used as a show or as a shorthand for devotion, what this devotion can cause a person to do, or something a person can relinquish. The pendulum. Jedediah and Elijah function as reflections of each other. Whoa, no way. Who wouldn't again? Yeah, they are stark opposites with some things, but they also share a couple of very similar qualities, and just the avenue in which they explore these qualities differ. Elijah appeals to Sydney initially partly because he is obsessive. Sydney wanted to be important to someone, and was at his most lonely point when Elijah made contact. He swings very much towards the opposite of how Jedediah acts. This is the most prevalent example of the contrast between Jedediah and Elijah. Jedediah is negligent towards Sydney for the majority of the show, and Elijah is obsessed, hence the pendulum. I mentioned a specific example of the contrast with the "you're always fine" phrase. I mentioned a specific example of the contrast with the "you're always fine" phrase that they both say at some point. Jedediah uses the phrase when Sydney was trying to convince Jedediah that they should care about the Elephant Man, and Jedediah says that Sydney's always fine, so he shouldn't be worried. At least in the moment, that's what it came off like. And Elijah uses the phrase as a form of encouragement that no matter what happens, something will always be there to catch him. On the surface, Jedediah's usage can be used to show how Sydney views Jedediah as neglectful towards him, and doesn't always treat him seriously, and Sydney's initial view of Elijah being what Jedediah lacks, a clear care towards him. But with more context with the two as people, Jedediah was saying that for his own sanity, because as he said, he didn't want to believe Sydney was in danger, which, while still kinda selfish, it did stem from a genuine care that Sydney did not believe to be there anymore. And with more context, the intention of comfort behind what Elijah said is still there. He was saying it to comfort Sydney, and was in earnest. But, of course, when you learn about his intention of killing Sydney while reading the journal he's making Sydney get currently, it feels more sinister and manipulative. But they both do just want to use him, through Sydney's initial perspective. But through Sydney's perspective, at one point or another, they do both just want to use him. Jedediah wants to use him for his own self-assurance at first. He only talks to Sydney if he needs something or wants to ask if he hates him. And Elijah ends up just wanting to use him to complete his ritual. Sydney just wants love without expectation, and during the events of Season 1, he isn't receiving that from Jedediah or Elijah. Even though Elijah says his love is unconditional. They both at one point disregard Sydney's autonomy in the name of love. Jedediah tried to protect and act for him without Sydney's knowledge or want. He made Sydney feel like shit because he was doing what he alone thought was best. A while ago I talked about how Elijah believes his love to be selfless, about how Elijah thought his love to be selfless and pure. Sydney wants to be loved, so that's what he'll do for him. He thinks the ritual will make people adore Sydney. Elijah also doing what he thinks is best for him and ignoring Sydney's autonomy. Another example of their love converging is in the last episode. Sydney and Jedediah talk about whether Jedediah is right for being okay with killing Elijah. Jedediah says that Elijah is worthless and he tried to kill Sydney, but Sydney justifies this by saying it was a ritual. Quote, "He didn't understand it as ending my life. He wanted to make me immortal, just like you." I like this. Jedediah's avenue of making Sydney immortal is keeping him alive any way possible, and Elijah's way is through killing him. Okay, we're getting back to the religious thing again for a second. If you believe what I said earlier about everything that happened with Sydney causing Jedediah's loss of faith, then that feels very connected towards what happened to Sydney causing Elijah's fanatic faith. Yeah, Elijah was already religious before Sydney, but you get what I mean. And if I'm completely wrong about the loss of faith thing, then we can just stay focused on the savior complex. He constantly views Sydney as something to be saved, and his savior complex can be seen as him accidentally walking down a path of warped holiness, similar to Elijah. Again, not intentionally, but like somewhat similar. They're again just different on how they want to save him. We're going to talk about clocks now. Part of this was word for word removed from what I was going to talk about in episode 27, but I think it's going to fit better here. You remember what Elijah said when he was referring to Lucio's grandfather clock. The clock tells him things he can't know. Jedediah's repetition of the phrase, "if I could just know, if I could just know, if I could just know," seems related. The wording is kinda similar, and they both repeat the phrase in a panicked fashion. Elijah has some kind of access to forbidden knowledge that he seems disturbed that he knows, and he knows this through the clock that Lucille owned. Jedediah seemed to obtain the clock of meantime in a somewhat purposeful way, and he's taunted by the clock with the fact that he can't understand it. And he wants to really bad. So another similarity is that both of these objects, they have a clocks and that they hold knowledge they probably shouldn't know, but the contrast in like if they do want to know it or they do not. Quote, "And here enters the prophet. Here enters he who has been chosen to finish the work the architect has begun. To witness, to understand, and to immortalize your beauty. Here enters me." Obviously, they are opposites, but it feels more severe than just saying the word opposites. Maybe them being each other's foils is the better term. They are motivated by the same idea of making Cindy immortal, through different avenues. And they hate each other, they succeed where the other fails. They couldn't exist as they do without the other. Elijah does hate Jedediah, but without Jedediah, bringing Cindy back, and maybe his general involvement in Cindy's life overall, I at least don't think he would worship Cindy as he does currently. And if you choose to believe that Elijah only cares for Cindy because he died and came back, then you would have to agree that in that case, Elijah worships Jedediah's act of reanimation too. I know there's more nuance than that. Trust me, I do. But he hates Jedediah, seemingly partly because he abandoned Sydney. I'm having a hard time coming up with the point of this section. I'm having trouble coming up with a point of any of this. Section Cahoots / Lucille is so suspicious. Okay, we're on to kind of a theory section now. Something is going on between Lucille and Elijah. First, proof. Episode 1, where Elijah gets into the bedroom through 3 locked doors. At least I'm assuming he went through the doors. I fucking talked about this when I was talking about episode 1, I'm not doing it again. I at first thought he crawled through the penguin tunnels, and I initially went into a whole rant about that. Okay, so what? Well, this means he opened the door. He didn't use the tunnels to get into the room, not a window. It must have been the doors. This guy was able to open 3 locked doors which supposedly have alarms that didn't catch him. I don't think he picked those lockers and dismantled the alarm system. I think we would have heard if he did any of that. So I think he has keys or someone was letting him in. Episode 19. When Cindy was sent out to take down Soren's altar, it's really important that Cindy did not go out of his way to gather. It's really important that if Cindy did not go out of his way to gather people himself, he would have gone out into the woods by himself. And this is notable for Lucille, because she went to the death fields with Cindy to get Soren. She's shown to be able to escort Cindy when going into the woods. But, oh, it was the death fields, it was different. The altar is doing a pretty similar thing to the death fields. And she doesn't know how dangerous it is, so why did she tell Cindy, someone who is physically disabled, and it's mentioned in the rock climbing episode that he has a hard time gripping things sometimes, so he's not the best person to take apart a stone altar to go, and she just sends him out there to do it by himself. But something does happen when Cindy's in the forest. Elijah asks him out for tea. Elijah seems to have expected Cindy to come to the altar but hoped he would come alone. But why would he expect that? Elijah seemed to have expected Cindy to come alone to the altar. But why would he even expect that? I mean, again, Cindy would have gone by himself if he didn't organize the group by himself. And Lucille was the one who didn't tell anyone to go with him. And if the Elephant Man learned about Cindy going to the altar from the announcements, then he would have also heard that Cindy was forming a group. So he must have heard and got the notion of Cindy going into the forest at all from some other source. I can't think of anyone else that might have given him that kind of information, but Lucille or someone else. I don't know how else he would have gotten that information. Episode 30. In this episode, when Jedediah runs out of the cabin, he sees the campers enthralled by Elijah's sermon. He sees Lucille and asks her to do something, but she just says nothing to him and walks away. She also does not seem to be affected by Elijah's powers, just like Jedediah. And she just silently walks away from Jedediah. Like, it could be said that she never does anything anyways, so this makes sense. But she doesn't even address Jedediah at all, which seems odd because she normally at least responds to him. And the whole scene is obviously there to be weird. The interaction would be pointless if it wasn't there to single out Lucille. And combined with everything else, it feels related to Elijah. Like she was purposefully not being involved because of him. and she didn't want Jedediah to catch on or something. Episode 33/34. Quote, "We managed to bring him into camp, but Lucille was supposed to keep him detained and everything Lucille was supposed to keep him contained and everything while I took care of you, and he escaped." I mean, then, like, it feels like it's setting up that Lucille was responsible for him escaping. How else did he get away? If Lucille wanted to keep him detained, he'd still fucking be there. So I think she let him go for some reason. And the section within a section, her just generally lying about shit. Jedediah goes to Lucille to get her to do something about the Elephant Man, and she says that she has no idea who he is. And this is in episode 18. This is a lie. Obviously, people have been going to her about the guy, along with her ignoring him as the show goes on. She might be the person who knew about him the longest, as revealed in the last episode. Elijah came around years ago and threatened to kill her with a knife, so he could find out where Sydney was. She was playing stupid the whole time, and she knew he was dangerous. She tries to make herself seem better by saying that she couldn't have stopped him anyways, for various reasons that are bullshit. Except for the police thing, I guess. I talk about why these were bullshit in the final episode in more detail. And again, Lucille seemingly gains nothing from not telling Jedediah about this earlier, when the guy showed up years later messing with Sydney. She seemed to plan on never telling anyone about the incident several years ago. It seems more like she was hiding this because she knew this was something Jedediah should have known. So again, why hide it? She knew this was seemingly important information. And, just here's some weird Lucille shit. The fucking plant. I already kinda talked about this in episode 28, but anyways. Episode 19, the first specific mention of the plant. Quote, "Cabin ladybug stumbled upon a mysterious weed whose roots were deeply embedded in the ground. No one could uproot it." Lucille flipped out. And again, I also think this plant shows up in episode 28 as the vines holding the book, when Cindy's going through the tunnels. Jedediah knew about these plants and hit it with it. Why does Jedediah know about this? If you remember the plant Lucille was really protective over, the kids couldn't have taken it out of the ground because the plant was so deep down. Maybe this is where it goes deep down too. And the plants are one of the same. That would explain why Jedediah knew about it, yada yada. I think Lucille has a weird and strange living plant that she doesn't want to be touched. Nothing to say specifically, but I think this will be important. She was also just generally odd during episode 12, with the Council Olympics. I already talked about what I thought was happening, but Lucille's involvement is still odd. If Jedediah's goal in that episode was to just punish himself, why would Lucille agree to help him with that? And if my interpretation for the episode is completely off, then it still doesn't really clarify her intention. Whatever was going on, both Jedediah and Lucille seem to agree about it. She also just owns this patch of land that is inherently so special. And the camp, she apparently has this land before it had an explicit need for helping Sydney be reanimated. The most apparent ability the land has is given life. Does she know about that? Why a summer camp? Going back to the whole Elijah and Lucille thing, you might see why I think they have something going on between them, but why? And if they do have communication of some sort, why does Elijah still not rely or like Lucille in any way? He doesn't like any of the camp personnel, which includes Lucille, and he explicitly refers to her as Sydney's warden. So if there is a deal, it would have to be really tenuous. Forced like it wasn't a deal that they were happy to make, and just for a single thing outside of any other form of help. Or it might not have been a deal exactly, just something Lucille is enacting herself. Maybe she's just helping behind the scenes without Elijah really noticing something. It would explain why he doesn't trust her. Okay, then why? We learn from the descriptions that the organization is going after Elijah, and maybe this is a stretch, but her main concern is not getting the authorities involved with the camp. So maybe she somehow knew that these people might be coming and let Elijah go so he would lead them away. These are spitballs right now. I'm gonna be real, as I'm writing this, I'm not really sure why Lucille would agree to want to help Elijah. I was running with the idea that it was to keep Jedediah safe somehow, but it would be odd if she was working behind the scenes to keep him safe while just not caring about anything that was happening at the camp that is putting him in danger. Maybe she thinks Cindy staying around is going to start to drive too much attention to the camp, and thus Jedediah, and Elijah coming back is the last nail in the coffin, so she just goes with it, and let Elijah do what he wants. I don't know if that doesn't really feel good, like a good theory, I don't know. I do think something's going on though. I get that this is not concrete though, I don't know what's happening. Elijah's powers. I just want to talk about Elijah's powers. This is gonna be erratic because I'm having a hard time to find any other through lines. A lot of these are gonna be brain dumps, okay? Episode 29. I had the thought that his powers could be an extension of sorts of the ceremony. Elijah plans for Sydney to sleep eternally on the pyre, and Elijah's powers cause Sydney to be very sleepy. And his followers slash everyone else to match Elijah's fervor during the ceremony. Quote, "The cattle, they listen to me. When they look into my eyes, they feel my passion. They become enraptured. So I will take responsibility and I will herd them, my followers, your witnesses, to the pyre of borrowed sentiment. I will light the tower of flame, I will burn you, apotheosis through sleep." You know, like his powers were an aid to help everything go smoothly. Other people didn't become enraptured. In feeling his passion, they couldn't be shepherded and wouldn't participate. It also encapsulates how he hopes the congregation would function overall, because overall, people would understand Elijah's perspective, match his fervor and worship. His powers cause Cindy to get very sleepy or pass out. This is obviously useful for getting Cindy to cooperate with the ritual. This also encapsulates the hopeful outcome for Elijah. He hopes to grant Cindy apotheosis through sleep. And Elijah actually just putting Cindy to sleep via his powers seemed like an extension again. Maybe that's why Lucille and Jedediah aren't affected by his powers. Elijah genuinely dislikes them and what they did and are doing to Sydney, them being seen as going against him and his cause, so they aren't welcomed or wanted in the religion or the ritual. Therefore, because they aren't meant to be at the ritual, Elijah's powers have nothing to be an extension of or emulate. Another way you could interpret his powers is Elijah putting Cindy to sleep. It could represent how a lot of religious fanatics will disregard the actual word or desire of their religion or god, and just puppeteer the limp body of their god around to get it to do and say what they want. This could also lead to Cindy's autonomy and how the people around him disregard it to get what they want. The autonomy aspect could also be taken by itself. The recurrent element of Cindy being involved in unhealthy relationships where his autonomy is disregarded is obviously present with Elijah and Jedediah. Elijah's power is him basically disregarding what people want or feel. He's inflicting his own wants and emotions on these people. And for others, Elijah's fervor disregards how others feel, and Elijah places his own emotions over them. Also, it makes it so people don't help Sydney, and this further emphasizes his feeling of helplessness or people not caring about him. This is also just a full encapsulation of Sydney's relationship issues or just his general feel of autonomy being taken. A lot of this stuff in the show could just very easily be read as a big representation of just shitty relationships overall. Like, that could be like the main thing you take away from this, like how relationships can hurt people and shit, and how it's very clear to see that that's like a main takeaway that the show kind of wants you to have. And I didn't write a specific section for that, but like I hope you can get that through multiple things that I say. I just thought I said everything that would be in that section enough in other parts that hopefully you get that. So I want you to know that I do get that as a point of the show. Elijah timeline. I think there's a lot to talk about. In episode 33/35, Lucia reveals she and Elijah met 7 years ago, 4 years before Sydney died. Elijah came into the camp in winter looking for him with a knife. When Lucille describes meeting him, she never mentions him wearing scrubs, a robe, or a robe, so I have to assume he wasn't wearing any of that when she saw him, and was just wearing unremarkable clothes. And this is probably because this occurred, and this is obviously because this is early on in his Sydney revelation arc. He had such a different personality when he first met Lucille. He was panicked and erratic and desperate to find Sydney, but later we know he waited in the woods for at least a year without making any contact, and was so fucking chill when he finally did. Maybe this has to do with him saying that he was scared and tried to deny Sydney's divinity when it first came to him. Maybe that was around the time he went to Lucille. The fact that he showed up with a knife is odd. This is before Sydney was even working there, so how he assumed he was working there, I don't know. Maybe he just showed up with a knife to threaten people for information, but it seems he also kind of expected to learn where Sydney was. I had the thought that maybe due to him being so clearly erratic, and self-admittedly tried to deny Sydney's divinity, that maybe he was so freaked out he was planning to just kill Sydney, not for any religious purpose, but just to make it stop. This is not based on really anything. How did he find out about Sydney? Leo, I have to assume that he went to Lucille before he was Sydney's nurse. Sydney died 3 years ago, and Elijah went to Lucille 7. Why the fuck would he care about Sydney before the whole rebirth thing? Was there something special about Sydney before the rebirth? Did he get a prophecy or something? I think the only possibilities we get in the is in episode 33/34, when Elijah is reading from Jedediah's journals. In the earliest chronological entry, Jedediah says he broke into Sydney's dorm to try and find something more about how Sydney has some kind of magic. Quote, "It's this sort of spiritual art of using your thoughts and your feelings to affect the world in indirect ways." And Jedediah does not know how to explain it. Like, it shows that something was different about Sydney before everything, so maybe that could be correlated. In the finale, Elijah says he's been watching as everything went down with Jedediah and Sydney. I don't know if he meant he's been around for the past 7 years, or just since the hospital. Either way, he knows about the personal details about what happened with Jedediah reviving Sydney without having read the journal as shown in episode 29. So again, he was either watching them for a while or was prophesized something, or he saw a prophecy. Also in the episode 1 description, it's revealed that he was a point of interest to this organization before he made direct contact with Sydney. They also didn't really seem to know if he existed or not, so they can't have known him through being Sydney's nurse. So there was a correlation between him and Sydney before the hospital. Maybe I'm just confused about this. After Lucille, he somehow made his way into being Sydney's nurse about 4 years later. Maybe he was stalking Sydney for those 4 years? He was put together in the hospital, which again shows a contrast in personality from when he met Lucille and when he was a nurse. And right after, when Sydney was discharged from the hospital, Elijah immediately went after him, as shown by him not changing out of his scrubs. So he didn't have his powers when he was a nurse, because how was he supposed to have moved around the crowded hospital in general if he did? Or maybe he did because the only person we heard him interacting with was Sydney, who was already in a coma of some sorts, and Jedediah, who isn't affected by his powers. Or maybe that if I was right about his powers only being an extension of the ritual, then his powers only work on the people at the camp, which I don't know. And after being caught and released after the whole pyre thing, he tries to go back to Russian Town Archangel. I don't know how to say it. Very funny to imagine this guy, possibly still in a robe and mask, trying to get on a plane. Food and Sydney. It's the next section, Food and Sydney. In episode 31, Sydney's allegorical relationship to food is displayed. Quote, "Being fed is not always the same thing as being nourished." This is said in relationship to kids not believing Sydney was malnourished because he wasn't thin. But that was because the cheapest foods aren't exactly healthy, as said in the show. In that episode, Sydney's having a dream about this. In that episode, Sydney's having a dream about that situation, but food is replaced with love. His peers were questioning how he could feel unloved if everyone now is paying attention to him, and that Elijah certainly wants him, but that's all cheap food. You can be wanted without being loved. I think food can be seen as an extension of love or care throughout the entire show. Of course, this functions alongside the literal depiction of starvation and isn't just a metaphor. Sydney talks about how he misses that Jedediah used to eat with him. Quote, "I don't like to eat alone, holed up in my room like I used to do every night in that dirty, dirty house. Eating alone is comparable to being back in that awful childhood home." Clearly we know Jedediah is drifting away, but along with this quote, we can tell the severity. This feels like it bulks out how food can show a disconnect, simply. Adam introduces himself by inviting Sydney to sit and dine with him, and later pressures him to eat an apple, by saying it's rude to deny a meal. Notably, there's also this exchange. When Sydney says he's not hungry after being offered food, Adam says, "My dear," he says lovingly, "you're always hungry." This could show how Sydney craves to be loved desperately, to an extent where he accepts finding an unhealthy substitute. Maybe Adam beginning to eat himself could be interpreted as an illustration of Sydney being hungry for care, hungry to the point of self-destruction, such as going to Elijah. Maybe the centipede can represent something similar. The centipede eats both a young version of Sydney and a blue jay, which also often represents Sydney. The centipede also seems to show up with things concerning Sydney's past, so maybe it could also be that Sydney's past is eating him alive. Some interactions with Adam may also allude towards Sydney's mother again. When we first hear about Adam, he's asking Sydney to talk about how his mother hurt him in episode 11, while he sits across from him, and a strong aspect of his childhood was not getting enough food or just good food. So Adam being the character to use food as a metaphor with Sydney seems purposeful. Maybe exposure therapy is a decent phrase. In episode 12, Sydney describes his childhood, his horribly dirty house and his mother. He talks about a moment where he was in his backyard where lilacs are growing, and he would eat them because his mom could not afford actual food. And I'm not proposing that this is all allegorical. That would be wrong. I just think along with it being an actual occurrence, it could also present a metaphorical correlation. When Sydney was in his childhood home with his neglectful mother, he was starving, and when he would visit Lucille, where Jedediah lived, he was able to eat. The food was sterile, but still. Sydney's position in life or his emotion on something can be seen in how food is treated. The bread curse. You guys remember the bread curse? Sydney's cursed to only eat bread, and I want to talk about how fucked up that is. I know it's mostly meant as a joke, but let me have this. This guy who's only had limited access to food most of his life, and then he later gets a job where he has access to what's said to be a really good chef, but he can't take advantage of that because he can only eat bread. Anyways, I don't remember if they said when he got the bread curse, but I think it was something in his adulthood. Maybe it can be seen as Sydney being caught in a cycle of being unnourished. Season 2 theory. So Cabin Dumbito plans to break away from the camp and form their own across the lake. This is going to be a plot point in the next season, but I'm particularly interested in who's going to be watching them. Sydney explicitly says how Juniper isn't going to come with them, but we do know who would be interested. Soren, his whole motivation for being there was that he was at the land of the camp helped him with his eternal life aspirations. And I'm assuming across the lake is still connected to the land. So I think Soren would be part of the rival camp. Anyways, I mean, somehow I think some kind of information is gonna make its way to Soren. Somehow. Soren would like freak, right? If he learned that someone had effectively accomplished the animation and some form of like extension of life. So I think there's some antagonist potential there. Adam's gonna be a bigger aspect, I think. He'll show more of his couple's therapist qualities and maybe start fucking with things more. Lucille might also be a bigger annoyance, because I think Jedediah is suspicious of her a little bit. And Lucille might still be affected by what happened. Even if you don't think she and Elijah are connected in any way, she still seemed affected by him. I also think that the macaroni tunnels and the fucking plant are gonna be a big aspect in the next season, and the agents won't get majorly involved yet. Maybe the Tonys will be more ambitious with gathering data or influencing things, along with the descriptions taken on a different tone. But other than that, I think that's gonna be saved for like a future season. Okay, I hope that you agree that I talked about Sydney's autonomy through this whole thing enough for me not to go over the whole concept again. I was thinking about going more into it and his whole theme and issue being an extension of the various aspects of his life, but everything I could say is pretty much covered by Sydney saying that he can't control anything in his life, including his own body, so he only escapes in his thoughts. And sprinkled everywhere, I've already repeated myself enough in other sections. I hope you can get the message throughout various parts. Conclusion. Holy shit, I'm done. Okay, I wrote this part. Currently, I wrote this a long time ago from when I'm recording this. Wrote this 6:45, April 7th, 2024. So obvious this show, okay, that's a while ago. So, okay, so obviously this show means a lot to me. I would love to get into the emotional elements as to why, but that'd be too much, you know? There was this whole section that I wanted to add to this video, but I feel that for me to make those sections the way that I wanted to, I'd have to go too real for my liking, at least in this setting. I don't want to do that right now, so I'm sorry if I'm like missing something. I can't do those sections if I can't do it the way that I want, and I'm not gonna go like into my emotional shit in this, so whoops. Oh well. I hope I was able to convey what I wanted to throughout this. And if you did make it here without listening to the show yourself, first of all, I'm sorry you can experience it all fresh for yourself. But you can still watch it. I didn't capture everything that is to love about the show, and maybe I fucked up describing something which you can now see for yourself. This whole thing is also covering the first season, and from what I know, season 2 is expected to come out at some point. So listen to the show for preparation for possible season 2. And if you're someone who's either watched the full season before clicking on this video or took my advice and watched it before coming back here, thank you. Thank you very much. I really hope I did the show justice, and I'm so scared that I misinterpreted something, or I misrepresented something in the show, or was just overall clumsy with my writing or quote-unquote analysis. Please tell me if I did, and please add your own thoughts. I wanna hear you talk about it. I also understand there are things that are happening behind the scenes currently, and I don't feel like this is the place to discuss that. But I do encourage you to support the show. I don't know what to add besides that this show deserves so much love, and along with everyone who's working on it. I'm not sure what else to say. I really appreciate you being here. Good night, campers.